In this video, I will be discussing my infographic on the Amazon rainforest, the largest tropical rainforest on the planet and the most productive land-based ecosystem in the world. Before we begin, here's a quick overview of what my final infographic looked like. Throughout this video, we will be going over the design decisions I made in making this infographic. Here is also a quick overview of the models I used in making my infographic. We'll be going over these in more depth later. Just for now, know that the one on the left is the visual language, color, and typography model that I based my infographic on, and the one on the right is the layout model. To start things off, I'm going to be going over how my infographic uses the 5 forms of visual potential. I want to start by going over the visual potential of appearance. The visual potential of appearance is something's ability to convey how something looks using imagery, allowing you to recognize something or show you how it is supposed to look via its appearance, aka how it's supposed to look using shapes and lines found throughout images. The main appearance display that I have created is the background here to my time display, which you see in front of you. This display is the visualization of my time display and shows a layered rainforest at the peak of its health, decaying to being cut down but then beginning to grow again. This display helps my viewers associate the information on the timeline to what was happening in the rainforest during those time periods via the visual condition of the rainforest in the display. This appearance display emulates the main appearance display found within my visual language model by using simple icons with one color and filled completely with that color to make up the visual display, just like is done throughout most of the display in the model. It also uses multiple colors to encode distance and layer objects in order to create a display that seems to span more than one dimension, just like you can see done in the model circled on the right. My second main use of visual appearance is found within my various icon displays throughout the infographic, like the one in front of you. The icons exploit the visual potential of appearance by giving an image that reflects the title of each display and uses circles to contain the displays. These icons are simple but familiar and use these familiar shapes and images to allow viewers to create an association between the icon and the information near it. As you can see, the displays I created, like the one on the left, emulate my visual language model by using circles to contain icons with information. When you compare the icons I found with the icons in the visual language model, you can see that they have a similar 1 to 2 color scheme, and use lines, thickness, fills, and level of detail in the same way to create simple icons that still allow easy viewer association with what the icons represent. Next, I'm going to be going over the visual potential of relationships. This visual potential is the potential to convey connections between things in the real world using connections between objects on or within a display. The main purpose of relationship displays is to show how things are connected. For my display, I want to display the relationships found between the various layers of the Amazon rainforest and how they work together to make the most productive ecosystem on our planet. I encoded the relationships between these layers using overlapping circles that contain similarities where the circles overlap and distinctive features within the circles themselves. This display takes on the style of a Venn diagram and applies to a representation where all the layers do not overlap with every other layer. As I said earlier, the areas that are circled here are those that show the actual relationships between the various layers by showing circle overlap and similar characteristics between the connecting layers of the rainforest. As you can see in the circled central display in front of you, I also used lines to create associations with where the layers are in accordance with one another by connecting the Venn diagram displays with the location on a rainforest image in the center. This display exploits the visual potential of relationships by using overlapping circles to show how the various layers of the rainforest are connected both physically and in terms of features where the circles overlap. Next, I would like to go over how I exploited the visual potential of numbers. The visual potential of numbers is the potential to convey amount, size, or percent of things in the real world using displays involving numbers, amounts, percentages, or sizes on a page. Number displays all show you how many, or how much, or how often something happens, and use common types of displays like graphs, charts, pie charts, isotypes, and many others. In my numbers display, I used pie charts that show visually a fact about the Amazon rainforest through the percentage displayed within the pie chart and labeled on the pie chart. These pie charts are also attached to a bubble above that has an icon relating to the pie chart. The pie charts encode the visual potential of numbers through amount. This relates to the amount of the circle that is filled up and represents a percentage relating to a given fact about the Amazon. I could have used other encoding styles like creating numerous icons in an isotype chart, or displaying information on a line graph like I did in previous displays of mine. However, I decided that using pie charts works best for the final model because they cleanly convey the story I want to tell, while also representing my visual language model's use of circles. The pie charts used throughout my infographic emulate my visual language model, seeing as they are pretty much taken from the visual language model. I use the same color scheme and information display style as the pie charts found within the model do. I also relate the fact to which the pie chart explains by displaying the information directly below the pie chart. I will note that the pie charts found throughout my infographic, like the examples on the left here, slightly deviate from the ones in the model, like the ones on the right here, because the number in the middle is slightly smaller. This was done to give it a slightly cleaner look within the overall context of the infographic. The visual potential of time is the ability to convey the relativity of events to one another throughout time via relative position within a display. In my time display, I exploited the visual potential of time by creating a chronological timeline of the deforestation and partial regrowth of the Amazon rainforest. This timeline tells a story of how the Amazon was cut at an unprecedented rate, and how the deforestation rate of the Amazon has improved over time but still has a long ways to go. With the years at the top of each bubble on the timeline, the viewer can easily tell when the event happened. I also used the cultural convention of reading from left to right and lines connecting each event to show that the events occur in chronological order on a timeline. I would also like to note that my time display here does make a slight departure from my visual language model. My visual language model does not use lines in any way to connect circles to one another, but it also does not represent time in any way. So I made the adjustment to be able to use lines here to connect circles to show the chronological order of events here on a timeline. Lastly, I would like to go over the visual potential of location, which is the ability something has to communicate the relative positions of things, places, or people in the real world using shapes on a page and how those shapes relate to one another. Location displays show you where something is visually. For my location display, I used a map of the world to show where tropical rainforests are located and how big they are relative to one another. I used circles to encode the size of rainforests relative to one another and also show where they are located. My location display here on the left does a pretty good job of emulating the location display found within my visual language model, which you can see on the right. Both use partially transparent circles on a world map to show where things are located and how big they are. I did circle one slight departure that I made from the visual language model in putting a label here on the Amazon rainforest to show people where it's located for those who didn't already know where it was. Next, I would like to spend a few minutes going over the display in front of you. This display is both my color, typography, and visual language model, and I'm going to show you how I emulated this model throughout my infographic. We'll first start by going over this infographic in front of you as a color model and how I emulated this color model throughout my infographic. Here you can see all the colors found within my color model. You can also see that this model uses an analogous color scheme, seeing as it uses all colors from a bluish-green grouping, the same grouping within the color wheel. You can also see on the right all the colors that I decided to implement from my color model and put over into my infographic. Here you can see one example of my emulation of my color model from my map display on the left to their map display on the right. Both use the same exact color for the map in the background and the text found within it, and also use this light blue, slightly transparent color to show where locations are on the map. Next, I'll be going over how my infographic, which you can see on the left, emulates certain portions of my color model, which I'll be putting up on the right side of the screen. Here you can see that I use color to highlight and draw the attention to icons found throughout my infographic in my visual displays and circles on the location display, just like the model does, by making them a brighter color than the dark background behind them in order to draw the viewer's attention. I also use a similar color scheme throughout for icons, just like the blue-green color scheme you can see on the icon on the right, within bubbles, and for the informational bubbles themselves, so viewers will come to associate this color layout and scheme with the informational bubbles found throughout the entire infographic. As I talked about earlier, I also use color to encode layering in my visual timeline display, just like is done with the model, which makes the display seem like it's multidimensional through the use of different colors for different layers of the display, like you can see on the right, and you can see within my timeline display on the left. Now if you compare the final color model on the bottom here to my final infographic on the left, you'll see both use this bluish-green set of colors to create a somewhat modern tone that I felt my infographic was going for. I thought this would be good for my topic because it helps bring about the idea that the Amazon is still relevant in modern society and might draw people in because it is different than the typical green-brown color scheme that one would expect for an infographic about something natural like the Amazon rainforest. In emulating my color model, I used similar proportions of colors as they did and also used colors for the same things. The background with lots of spacing was the same light blue. The icons had the same blue-green color scheme, and the darker bottom bars had the same color scheme for their icons and text as can be found within the model. The main departure I made from my color model was the decision to not include the cream color in my appearance display behind the timeline. In the model, they used this to add some more details to the front two layers of the city. However, I thought the inclusion of this color would take away from the story I was trying to tell through the deforestation and rebuilding of the Amazon within the timeline, because the cream color in the front two layers would draw more attention to them when I think it is equally, if not more important, to realize that the back layer is more prominent at the beginning and gets cut down over time, just like how much of the old growth forests in the Amazon have been cut down. This is my typography model. Over the next few slides, I'll be going over the two different types of fonts they use throughout the typography model and how I emulated these fonts throughout my final infographic. The font you see in front of you is Franklin Gothic URW Heavy and is used for titles throughout both the model and my infographic, and it uses default spacing between the letters. This new font on the 1.8 million below is actually another font that is found throughout my typography model. However, it was only used 2 times throughout the entire model, and it was used for some of the titles, and it wasn't used for other similar titles. When I talked to Marilyn about this, she thought that this typography here was probably an error from within the model, so I decided not to include it in my final infographic. The font added on the annotations below is Franklin Gothic URW Comp Book. It's used for all small text throughout the model, and it also tends to have more spacing between individual letters than the font does by default, so I emulated this within my models for all smaller text. Here you can see the translation of the title text found within the model to the title text found within my infographic. And here you can also see the emulation of the smaller font found within the model to the smaller font found throughout my infographic here on the bottom. As you can see, I emulated the same small text with extra spacing between the letters. Next, I would like to go over a few departures that I have from my font model. The main departure that I have from my model is the size of the text found in the relationship display. This is something I wish I could have done better, but I could not think of a way to display the relationship model the way I wanted in terms of size and spacing and still have the font be proportional to the titles, so I decided to make the font slightly smaller in proportion to its titles than what is found within the model, so the text would fit inside the relationship Venn circles. Another variation that I found between my typography found throughout my infographic and the typography model is that the smaller text is slightly bolder in my infographic than it was in the model. This is something that I wish I had caught earlier and wish I could have done better, but I just noticed when putting the slideshow together, so I thought it would be good to include it here to show that this variation does exist. The 2 small pie charts below show you an example of precision labels. Precision labels tell you about precise data values represented by visual elements. I use precision labels on all of my pie charts to show exactly what percentage of the pie chart represents. This is emulated directly from how my model, as you can see here on the right, handles pie charts. I also use precision labels on my timeline to show exactly what year an event takes place on throughout the timeline. I also use identity labels, which are on the other hand used to explain what a graphical element is supposed to represent. I use identity labels for the titles below each icon because these labels relate back to what is shown in the picture above and help people relate that picture to the whole informational bubble. I use it in a slightly different way than my model does because my model uses identity labels to give more information about a fact, where I use my identity labels to give more information about the bubble as a whole, including the icon. On the bottom left here, you can see how I use annotations throughout my infographic to convey information the same way the model does, which is the example on the right. It gives a brief expansion on a fact presented by a visual element or a title. Lastly, I would like to go over the text association strategies within my infographic. The association strategies for all the text from my infographic is also taken directly from the model. Text that is associated with a given visual element is either contained within the visual element, like in the infographic circles, located directly under the visual element, like you see in the bottom red circle here on the pie charts, or located to the left of the visual element, like you see in the dark blue area that is circled on the top of the infographic. Next up, I would like to spend some time going over my visual language model. It uses simple shapes that don't have much detail within to create associations to the information related to the shapes. The model also uses very few lines and has complete fills of one color for each individual shape within the infographic. All the icons and visualizations within the model are not transparent with the exception of circles on the map that allow you to see the map behind them. The visualizations may be for the most part undetailed, but they do have a fairly high level of realism because they allow for easy viewer association with what they're supposed to represent. On the left here you can see icons that I found for my infographic and how they emulate those icons taken from the model on the right. These icons are fairly realistic yet undetailed. They use this approach from the model. They also use the same textures and fills throughout and use 1 to 2 colors just as icons do within the visual language model. You can also see that I took the visual style for my world map here on the left directly from the world map found within the visual language model on the right. I use the same level of detail on the world map as they do and use the same semi-transparent circles that they do to show where locations are on the map. I also use the same pie charts with similar styles, number strategies, and text association strategies as is found on the visual language model, with the text being directly below the information that it relates to. On the left here, you can see one of the circular informational bubbles I used, and on the right is one of the similar bubbles found within my visual language model. Both the models and my infographic use circles throughout as the main way to contain and convey information. On the left here, you can see my final infographic compared with my visual language model. You can see that I visually displayed information in the same way my model did, using circles to contain all of the information in some way, shape, or form, using boxes to contain some of the individual displays, while also leaving some open background to create a sense of openness throughout the display. I also use dark bottom bars to contain information at the bottom of displays, as is done with the main display on my visual language model. The main departure I had from my visual language model was the decision to scale back some of the detail on the main display by not including the extra details the cream-colored specs provide. The main reason I did this, as I stated earlier, was to keep an equal focus on all three layers of the display, as to not purposely disrupt visual hierarchy like the model seems to do by adding bright color details to the first two layers. Next, I would like to go over some other distinctive features that my infographic conveys, ranging from visual hierarchy to unity and variety. We'll start with visual hierarchy, which is the use of things like position, size, and color to cause certain elements within the infographic to grab a viewer's attention before others do. One way in which I create visual hierarchy is reading from top to bottom, having my story start at the top and go to the bottom, because most viewers do read from top to bottom. Here, as you can see in the red rectangles, I also created visual hierarchy through my titles. The biggest font that I have, the biggest titles that I have, are those that are the section headers that are labeled within the red rectangles to the left. You can see that my model also does this with the red rectangles on the right side, having the most important headers, the most important titles being the largest and therefore the most eye-catching, and also having them be the opposite color, a contrasting color to the background behind them, so they grab the eyes of the viewer more easily. You can see that subtitles or subsections here that are outlined in red rectangles in the left and right now are smaller than the titles of the main sections because they're meant to be less eye-catching. This creates a visual hierarchy where you see the main titles first and will then go and read what actual sections are about before going and reading the titles of the subsections to see what smaller subsections of overall sections are about. The large bar outlined in red on my final infographic on the left creates visual hierarchy and is taken directly from the large bar that's found at the bottom of the visual language model on the right. I translated this bottom bar from their horizontal display to my vertical display in order to create visual hierarchy that separates the two sections. This bar goes all the way across, is thick, and is a darker color from the background because it is meant to be eye-catching and grab the viewer's attention so they know that this is where the infographic splits its two sections, and the viewer is meant to go from learning about deforestation as a problem to why they should care about saving the rainforest. Next, I would like to talk about unity. Unity is how repetition is used within a display to create a sense of connectedness throughout. I use Unity within my infographic by making section titles similar sizes based on importance. I also use Unity by repeatedly using circles as a container for visual elements as for visual elements themselves throughout my display. As you can see on the left here, I use circles to contain things, to contain information, and use them throughout my display, just as you can see is done in the visual language model to create unity on the right. Variety is the use of variations throughout a given display to make it more interesting than just using the same thing over and over again. It is important to find a good contrast of unity and variety in any given infographic. One way in which I use variety throughout my infographic is the different way I use circles in terms of size and transparency. While the circles do help create a sense of unity throughout, the different transparency, the different colors, and the different sizes I can see in the circles both in my final infographic and the visual language model on the right help create a sense of variety throughout. As you can see in aspects of my display on the left here and aspects taken from my visual language model on the right here, both use variety by using a vast amount of different icons in order to make it more interesting to look at visually. Lastly, I would like to talk about my layout model, how I emulated my layout model, and how my infographic uses the alignment strategies found within my layout model. Here you can see my final infographic on the left and my layout model on the right. My layout model is split up into distinct sections with the title headers on top and the sections being mostly vertically arranged. Each main section of the layout model has a title above it to start off the section, and other sections are arranged vertically, with one case of different displays being side by side horizontally. In the next section, I'll go over how my final infographic emulates the layout of this model. As you can see outlined in red here, both my infographic and the model start out by having a title at the top. Then both arrange their main sections vertically and display information in a mainly vertical way, as you can see outlined in red here. Both my infographic and the model then go on to have small red subsections under the main sections, as outlined in red in this part of the display. So far, the layout has all had information going in descending vertically from top to bottom. Now, in outlines red here, you see both my infographic and the layout model have one case of horizontal information, with displays being arranged from left to right. Just to recap, in order to emulate this layout model, I arranged my elements vertically and started sections off with a title. I also used one horizontal grouping near the bottom, just like the layout did. I grouped similar sections close together without large titles separating them, just like is done within the layout model. Lastly, I would like to talk about alignment and how I emulated it from my layout model. Alignment is how text and graphical elements are arranged so that they line up. Within my infographic, I align the titles of various sections to the left and also align boxes for the box sections towards the bottom with each other. I center aligned the boxes so that they had the same padding on both sides. I also aligned the displays for circles, like the animal one at the bottom of my infographic, so they had the same amount of padding on the left and right sides as all other nearby displays did. Here you can see how I center aligned the text, icons, and titles within the various circles to be center aligned and have similar padding around the outside. You can also see on the right here how I center aligned various text under number displays so that it would be right under them, just like is found within my visual language and layout models. I want to thank you for making it this far in the video, and thank you for watching. I hope you learned something about the process in which I made my final infographic for Info 362.